This is Duncan Peterman with the commemorative speech name of U.S. Grant, the man who defeated the Confederacy. Beginning in 3, 2, 1, begin. Good evening. My name is Duncan Peterman, and I'm going to pose a scenario to you. In the midst of a great war, you and your buddies are sitting in a damp, dreary, and muddy trench. While you and your pals are having a bit of fun because there's not much else to do in there, it is quite a boring war. While it may be boring, you and your friends are constantly on alert, on the prowl, for when artillery rounds or grenades will land into your trench, killing all of you and your friends. You also do not go above the lip of the trench. The reason being is that an enemy sniper could have his sights set right on that position. Thinking I am talking about World War I? While your answer is not completely wrong, I am, however, looking at the United States Civil War and one key player in it, Ulysses Simpson Grant, who was the man who defeated the Confederacy and revolutionized modern warfare. To begin, let us talk off by sharing stories about him during the Civil War. Very early on in the conflict, he had a capacity for being one of the Union's greatest generals. He started off his career by capturing two vital forts of the Confederacy, Fort Henry and Fort Donelson, which both served as vital communications links on the Mississippi River. This was noted in the Union because most commanders in the East, fighting in Virginia, could not possibly hope to obtain success against General Lee and General Johnson, who kept trouncing the Union forces time and time again. When the army of Grant's was attacked at Shiloh, Grant did an unusual thing amongst Union commanders. While he took horrible, horrible casualties, as Shiloh was one of the bloodiest battles of the Civil War, he waited and waited until the Confederacy had spent their attack on the first day, and then hit them hard on the second day, regaining all the ground that he lost on the first day, which was the Union city, the Union tent, their tent city. While many opponents in Washington proclaimed that Grant should be fired and that he was drunk during the battle, President Lincoln was said to say, "I like this man. He fights," clearly throwing shade to other generals such as General McClellan, who refused to fight the Confederacy even if they had a clear advantage. In the mid-war, Grant's one of his biggest victories came at the siege of Vicksburg. Vicksburg was the last Confederate-held post during the Civil War on the Mississippi River. Grant used some new tactics that had not been used since the medieval time periods, namely trench and siege warfare. First, Grant isolated the city from the land and the river, and he made sure that the Confederates could not escape the city. He then began digging a series of trenches, and the Confederates were forced to follow suit as they could not allow the Union into the city. He then decided to begin shelling the city day and night, so civilians were having to dig bunkers out of the cliff face, and they could not often get a lot of sleep. He also employed snipers to defeat the Confederacy and to make sure that they would continually be reminded that the Union was always there, watching. On July 4th, 1863, the Confederate city of Vicksburg surrendered, which was the same day as Lee retreated from Gettysburg. After this success, Lincoln recognized that Grant was just the man for the job for dealing with the Confederacy. He then appointed Grant the general of the Union Army and allowed him to fight the war as he wished. Grant then took his chief lieutenant during the Shiloh and Vicksburg days, General Tecumseh Sherman, and told him to wage war in the deep south of the Confederacy, He then went back east to defeat the biggest general the Confederacy had, General Lee. Even though General Grant was soundly defeated on his first battle against Lee, he did not give up. Indeed, most soldiers thought that he was going to run back to Washington like so many other generals had, like McClellan, McDowell, Hooker, and Burnside. However, Grant did not give up, and indeed he continued marching against the Confederacy. Once the veteran Army of Potomac figured this out, their spirits soared as they realized that finally they had a general who could fight. Once Grant had trapped Lee at Petersburg, another vital communications hub, he slightly adapted his tactics at Vicksburg to produce the same results: trench warfare, grenades, snipers, and constant artillery fire. He then told his chief lieutenant, General Sherman, to take the war home to the Confederacy, and he did that in his famous March to the Sea, in which he completely destroyed the state of Georgia. Now, once Lee had decided that his position was no longer tenable, he chose to withdraw from Petersburg. However, the trench warfare had already done its work. Lee could no longer fight, and he was forced to surrender at Appomattox Courthouse, ending the Civil War. Now, let's explain his legacy. Grant was a revolutionary commander to the U.S. Army at this time period. He practiced tactics that would re-emerge 50 years later in World War I. He also did not give up, and he kept defeating the Confederacy and kept pounding them into the dust at every opportunity he was given. If he lost, he continued at it. He did not give up. While we often see the Civil War as a quaint or romantic war, we often forget that it pioneered the tactics that would see the death of millions of soldiers during World War I. This is all a legacy to General Grant, the savior of the Union.